Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Good afternoon, good evening for those of you in other parts of the world. We are welcoming you to today's webcast. We are having a wonderful speaker today from Australia, Richard Duffy, and he's going to be presenting on the topic of SAP Business One, Database Platform Choices, Microsoft SQL Server, or SAP HANA. And this is from a user's perspective. My name is Kimberly Densmore, Event and Communities Coordinator, and we just want to make sure that everyone is able to type in their questions at any point during the presentation. You've got a Q&A box on your screen, and anytime you are ready to ask a question or give a thought or comment, you have that option available, so please make use of it, and our presenter will be happy to answer those for you. I just want to remind everyone that we do have our slides. There won't be slides for this particular session. We are hoping to have a very interactive session, so we don't have presentation for this one that will be posted to the Business One ASUG discussion page. However, for any future presentations or past presentations, please make sure to visit the SAP Business One ASUG discussion page if you're looking for presentations. So with that being said, we are going to go ahead and get started. So I am going to turn things over to our community evangelist and subject matter expert in the SAP Business One arena for ASUG, Richard Duffy. Richard, I will go ahead and let you take over everything from here on out.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Kim. And again, on behalf of all of us at ASUG, I want to welcome you to today's presentation. Today's presentation is really designed to be interactive, and as Kim has already said to you, the main focus of today is really going to be the opportunity for us to have a conversation. And when I say have a conversation, obviously, you know, from a certain extent, it's going to be me talking and then you having the opportunity to ask your questions through the Q&A functionality that you have available as part of the On24 platform that we are using with these webinars. Now, just to let you know, as we move forwards and we have the opportunity to do more of these sessions, we are going to start giving you the ability to be able to dial in. And then, so that will then give us the capability to actually engage in a verbal conversation rather than just me talking and you guys typing. So, you know, this one is really going to be our first attempt at being a little bit more interactive with these Business One sessions. So, what are we going to talk about? Well, we're going to talk about a topic that's near and dear to many people's hearts. I think because it's fair to say that for quite some time, most people are aware that there are multiple choices of database platforms available for SAP Business One. So you have SAP Business One, which is available on SQL Server. And right now, all things being equal, you should actually be able to see my screen, and I'm sharing a screen with SAP Business One version 9.3. So this is the very latest version of SAP Business One that is now in the early adopter phase, and I'm running this on SQL Server. So I also have running in another screen, I have my SAP Business One version for HANA, and that is version 9.2. So one of the things that I'm going to talk about with you today is what are some of the things that really make these two platforms different, and some of the things that are important to consider from your perspective as an end user, and certainly from my perspective as an end user as well, because many of you may already know this if you attended my last session, or you've read some of my recent blogs, but of course I worked for SAP for many, many years in the Business One team, but these days I'm actually an SAP Business One customer. So I am handing over my hard-earned cash to SAP for SAP Business One licenses. So, you know, I'm looking at this from the same perspective that you are. You know, what is the best way to deliver SAP Business One to my users, and what is the most effective way to deliver the functionality that people are looking for to help them do their jobs. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Then we're going to touch on another topic that has been the subject of a couple of recent blog posts, again, that I've done, and a couple of recent blog posts that have been done on the ASUG website. And this is around the topic of indirect access, because I think this is going to be one of those things that it's quite important to understand when you are making that decision of, you know, which database platform to move on to. Now, there's probably about 60,000 plus customers around the world, just like you and I, who are running their businesses today on SAP Business One. Of those 60,000 customers, I think right now there's probably about between 5,000 and 7,000 customers that are running on HANA. The rest are running on SQL Server. So I'm suspecting that quite a good number of you as SAP Business One users are already running on Microsoft SQL Server. And SQL Server is an outstanding database platform. You've probably been using SAP Business One for a while on SQL Server, some of you, because of course the product's been around for many, many years. But you know, one of the decisions that you have to make is, you know, should I be looking at upgrading to SAP Business One version for HANA? And why might you be thinking about that? Well, if you follow any of SAP's announcements and the roadmaps, and you look at where the new functionality is coming in, you'll see that there is a lot of the more, how would I put it? Let's call it, for the want of a better term, advanced analytical capability that's coming into the HANA version that you aren't seeing inside SAP Business One when it's running on SQL Server. So that's really the first point that I would like to make as we talk about the discussion of which database platform should you be using. For me, if you are not in an environment where you are working with lots of users, and we'll talk about some numbers in a second, but if you are not working in an environment where you have lots of users and, you know, hundreds of transactions and really large transactions being processed, then the main reason why you would want to contemplate running SAP Business One on HANA is really going to come back to this whole idea that with HANA, you have built into SAP Business One all of the analytical capability. So as you're looking at my screen, and it's not just a screenshot that you're seeing at the moment, I've actually got Business One running on HANA and Business One on SQL actually running here, and I'll be going through into each one of these applications. We'll be looking at them in a bit more detail. Now, just so you're aware, you can probably see that these are running inside a browser, and that's because I'm utilizing a platform called Ericom Connect. I also, as well as being a customer, I also run a cloud data center, all running on top of SAP infrastructure, running on the Cloud Control Center for SAP Business One, and I deliver the applications out in a web browser using Ericom. So if you're wondering how am I able to do some of the things that I'm doing, For those of you who are aware of the web browser client for SAP Business One, you'll see that even though I'm running inside the web browser, I'm not using the web browser client. I am using the full SAP Business One client. So we'll probably do a session on that, and that's certainly something that I'm going to talk about in the moving to the cloud session that I'll be doing at the Biz One conference, which starts in less than 10 days from now. So again, look forward to seeing some of you there at that event. Now, as we look at this, we're talking about this functionality around analytics. So inside SAP Business One version for HANA, and I don't know how many of you have actually had much of an opportunity to see this, but inside Business One version for HANA, you have a number of analytical capabilities. So you have the ability to create these widgets which exist on the dashboard. And in these widgets, in the cockpit area, you can come in here and you can simply click on the icon there, the little pencil icon. And I do apologize if there's a little bit of a lag. That's just something that gets introduced by our screen sharing platform. But when I click on that little pencil icon, you'll see I've got the ability to click on the plus key. And that now brings me up into the widget gallery. And this, for me, is actually one of the biggest advantages of SAP Business One running on HANA, is the fact that what SAP have done is that they have delivered a whole range of these different widgets that will allow you to share out and visualize the data that's inside your SAP Business One solution. So as I scroll down through these, you'll see not only do we have these widgets that give us like a visual or a graphical representation of statistics out of the system, like for example your top 5 customers or your best-selling items by salesperson or your aging of your overdue receivables. But you also have other widgets, for example, that you can add into the system that allow you to do some quite complex calculations. And those complex calculations are enabled specifically by the functionality in SAP HANA. The fact that HANA has a different way of storing the data, with a lot of the aggregation and a lot of the structuring of the data is already done in the background for you, and the data is stored with those structures in place. Whereas with SQL Server, it's possible to build these kinds of visualizations, and you can build them using tools like SAP Lumira. You can build them with tools like Microsoft Power BI or tools like ClickView. You've got all these different solutions that are available to you, and you can hook those into your SQL data, and you can build those dashboards. But of course, with HANA, they're all pre-built for you. Now, important point to note, when you're running on SQL Server, there are a lot of solutions available from the complementary solution partners where they have gone and they've built a range of these visualizations for you that are designed to work with SAP Business One. So they've tried to simplify and streamline that for you. Great example of this is what Boyum have done with their product, where it comes with a pre-built set of cockpits and dashboards that work with SQL Server. All right, so there are those options available for you if you are running on SQL Server. However, if you're working with really large amounts of data, you're going to see a huge performance enhancement when you're running on SAP HANA. Now, that's because HANA, by default, runs as an in-memory database. So that basically means that all of the data that you're working with is stored in random access memory. Okay, so it's stored in the RAM that sits inside the server, and that is incredibly quick when it is being accessed. So you'll see that speed during analytical activities, but you won't necessarily see that speed during transaction processing. So that leads me to my second point that you need to consider. And this is something that SAP have actually acknowledged themselves, is that if you have a smaller number of users and your transaction volumes are not high, then you're going to get better performance by running SAP Business One on SQL Server. So if you are not concerned about having access to all of this kind of analytical functionality and some other things which I'm going to tell you about in a minute, then SAP Business One running on SQL Server could well be the best choice for you. Now let me give you a personal opinion. The licenses that I have purchased, I purchased SAP Business One version for HANA. Why? Because I wanted to have access to these analytical views in the software. I also wanted to have access to the very latest technology because as part of what I do, that access to that technology is important. So let's just talk about that for a second. One of the components that has always existed inside SAP Business One, and it exists in both SAP Business One version for HANA as well as SAP Business One running on SQL Server, is what's called the DI API, or the Data Interface API, or Application Programming Interface. This is the piece of code, if you like, that allows either your partner, a software solution provider that builds a third-party or complementary solutions, as I like to call them, for SAP Business One, or it even allows you to go ahead and build your own applications which integrate with SAP Business One. So the DI API has been around for as long as SAP Business One has been around. But with SAP HANA, of course, you now have the next generation of the DI API, and that is called the service layer. And what the service layer is enabling partners and customers like us to do is it's enabling us to build a whole new set of applications that take advantage of the latest technologies. Give you a great example, and I've talked about this a number of times, and I only picked this solution because I've had the opportunity to work with it closely myself. If you take a look at what the guys at Achieve IT have done with their Resolve solution, utilizing the service layer, they have been able to re-architect their entire application so that it runs natively using an SAP technology called Fiori, and that enables them to run their applications in a web browser on any device. All right? What you see inside the SAP Business One version for HANA user interface, it's not true Fiori, but it is, and SAP refer to it as a Fiori-like interface. So it's designed to have the same appearance, but it's only when you move to that service layer, that the applications are built on top of the service layer, that you get the full capabilities of that. So that's an important piece to think about as you're thinking about what's happening from a technology perspective. Then SAP are obviously focusing on SAP Business One version for HANA. But with, as I mentioned, probably in excess of 50,000 customers still running on SQL Server, it's highly unlikely that SQL Server is going to go away anytime in the future. Now, that's just my prediction. That is not SAP's prediction, and I'm not making a comment one way or the other. So, as I'm talking about these things, you should be very careful not to misinterpret what I'm saying. Nobody is saying SQL Server is going away, but it is very, very clear that most of the new technologies and the new enhancements that SAP are delivering are running on top of SAP Business One version for HANA. And it's that HANA platform that enables those. Okay, so let me just recap quickly. Point number one, if you are utilizing large volumes of data and you are working with, and you want to take advantage of this analytical capability, then you should be running on SAP Business One version for HANA. If the analytics is not critical for you, if you are working with a third-party solution for doing your analytics, if you have a smaller number of users, and I said I'd give you some numbers, you're usually looking at around about the 5 user mark. From 5 to 10 users, when you get to about 10 users and above, you'll start to see that, and this is concurrent users, by the way, users who are logged onto the system at the same time pumping data into the system. When you get above 10 users, you're going to start to see some benefits with HANA. But less than 10 users in just the average day-to-day transaction processing, you will not see a speed increase. All right, so that's an important point to note. So that was point number one. Point number two is that, you know, from a technology perspective, if you want to keep up with that latest technology, then HANA is where you need to be. Now, also when you're looking inside SAP Business One from a functional perspective, and I'm going to take a break in a second and just dive across and see how we're going for Q&A. So just a quick reminder, if you've got questions, what I'd like you to do is to dive into the Q&A pod and make sure you put your questions in, and I will take a break and come back in and answer some of those questions. Of course, if we don't have too many questions, this could be quite a short session, but again, hopefully we will have some, because you will have some questions that you might want to get answered. So again, pop those into the Q&A pod, and I'll just quickly dive across there now and take a look. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen for a second while I do that. And we'll take a look. It looks like we do have some Q&A. All right. So great questions. So the first question that's come in is, are HANA licenses more expensive than SQL Server by about what percent? The big difference between the cost of a HANA, of SAP Business One on HANA and SQL Server is actually in the fact that you have to buy the SAP HANA runtime. So that comes with SAP Business One version for HANA. All right, so if you are looking at the pure licenses on their own, the licenses themselves are not that much more expensive one against the other, but the difference in cost comes as a result of the fact that you need to purchase the HANA runtime, which is factored into those licenses. Okay, so that's a great question. Another question, earlier I mentioned that if running a lot of clients and transactions that you would not be, what I was saying was, sorry, I'll give you the question in detail and then I'll address it. So earlier you mentioned that if you're running a lot of clients and transactions, you would not be using HANA. Can you explain when SQL Server is a better choice? I assume it has to do with the in-memory database of HANA. So maybe I might have answered that as I talked, you know, during the session, but what I said was if you are running a lot of clients and transactions, you should be using HANA. Okay, that is one of the clarifying points where HANA does make a difference, right? If you are working with a large volume of transactions and a lot of users keying those transactions in at any particular point in time. All right. So, and you're correct, that question was from Steve Scott Services. You are absolutely correct, it does have to do with the in-memory database of HANA. Now, having said that, it is now possible with SQL Server to build your Microsoft SQL Server box in such a way that you are optimizing for performance. So there are things that you can do if these kind of things trip your trigger, the technical nitty-gritty of how you do these things. You can build your SQL server and have it running with solid state hard drives. Okay, so instead of using the old style spindle-based mechanical drives, you use the solid state drives, which are effectively a much quicker access to data, pardon me, than you get with traditional hard drives. So it is possible to get a lot of that. It is possible to get a performance boost with SQL Server by doing that. Okay, but the big difference is that you've got that not only is it about the hardware and the in-memory, it's the fact that data is stored separately, okay, or it's stored differently inside SAP HANA. The data is structured in a different way, with a lot of that aggregation happening automatically in the background. So another question, if your team is and this is a great question because this then dovetails into the next point that I'd like to make. And just bear with me for a second. I need to grab a quick drink. I'm in a hotel room at the moment and the air conditioning is drying me out. So anyway, if your team is very knowledgeable on SQL Server stored procedures and so on and so forth, how much of that will be lost by moving to HANA? Well, that's a good question. HANA, the SQL language that you work with HANA has some fundamental differences to using Transact SQL with Microsoft SQL Server. But there is good documentation and guidance on what you need to do to take your knowledge set and move that across to HANA from SQL Server. And the great thing about what SAP have done with HANA is that there is a lot of online learning which is available free of charge. So the process of reskilling your people is made a lot easier by that, by the availability of that. The other point that I would make though is that if you are not going to move to SAP Business One in the cloud running on HANA, if you're going to deploy your own HANA servers and you're going to deploy your own environment from the ground up, then you will need to get some additional skills around managing that infrastructure, unless of course you outsource that infrastructure management to your partner completely and you never touch the system. So you need to learn about Linux, and in particular you need to learn about SUSE Enterprise Linux, and you need to build a skill set around managing that HANA server. Because it does tend to be a little bit more resource intensive when it comes to managing the server and keeping it running. And many partners will tell you that is one of those areas. So not only do you need to build a new skill set around working with those queries and the service layer, but you also need to build that new skill set around the infrastructure. So another question that came in, and I think it could be, it might be more of a comment, but I'll read it just in case you can't see it. So, the question is the comment is many times when I discuss HANA with customers, they need to upgrade hardware and they start asking about what other additional costs are incurred in HANA over SQL. Are there any suggestions on a complete list of considerations for the customer? So right now, I've not actually ever sat down and put that together, but it's certainly something that that I could do. So that's a good point, Zal, and that might be something that we can, and actually I'll take it as an action item to put it in as a discussion point inside the ASUG community in the Q&A area, and that will be a dynamic document that we can work on together as a community and add things to it. So it is a good idea to do that. And you are correct that HANA only runs on Linux. So when you are deploying HANA, you need brand new servers, and those servers have to be a very specific kind of server. So they have to be SAP certified servers, and there is a select list of those servers that are available. And why is that the case? That is the case because with this technology, it is much more dependent on the hardware. SAP do want to make sure that HANA runs at its optimum. So they go through a lot of work, and then they go through a lot of testing with the hardware vendors to make sure that those servers work effectively with the right combination of hardware to give you the best results possible. Okay, so pardon me. Again, that's a really important point to note, is that change across from SQL Server to HANA does require that that change of skill set, does require the additional investment in those servers. It does require the additional investment in operating systems, because even though Linux, as you may be aware, Linux is actually a free operating system. However, if you're running SUSE Enterprise Linux, you really do need to buy support for that. So you will also need to make sure that you have the correct support licensing for your SUSE Linux boxes. Okay. So are there any more questions that people have that they would like to ask? Because I've kind of touched on most of those points that I wanted to make as you go looking at the differences between the two solutions. One of the things that I would also like to suggest is that you take the opportunity to, if you're going to be at the BizOne conference, you take the opportunity to come along to the other session that I'll be doing, which is focused on reporting. And what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be showing you some different solutions that you can utilize that will give you the ability to generate some of the kinds of analytical views that you get out of HANA, but to be able to do those through SQL Server. And if you have a preference for one particular technology vendor or another, maybe you are using Office 365 and you've been looking at Power BI, for example. Well, I'm going to be showing you how you can utilize tools like Power BI to work with both SAP Business One version for HANA as well as SAP Business One running on SQL Server. All right, we'll do the same thing with SAP Lumira, because again, it's another great analytical tool that you should look at when you are contemplating how you're going to deliver, how you're going to build and deliver that business intelligence capability to your users. Okay. So with that, I'd like to give you one last opportunity to join the interactive session and ask your questions. But if you don't have any questions, I'll just give you a couple of seconds. If you don't have any questions, then I'm going to bring this session to a close by pointing out a couple of things for you. This is going to be an important topic, and I mentioned one of the reasons why. There is a process that when you're going through and you're accessing your data in SAP Business One, if you're accessing the data that you've created from SAP Business One and you're utilizing a tool like Microsoft Excel, or you're utilizing one of these different business intelligence tools, There's one additional thing you need to bear in mind, and I would point you to my most recent blog post on the ASUG community about the topic of indirect access. And if you haven't had a chance to read that blog yet, let me just summarize it for you in a couple of quick points. With SAP Business One, when you're running on SQL Server, if you want to access the data from an external tool, as long as your SQL Server database is licensed correctly, that means you have either bought client access licenses for each one of your users, or you are licensing your SQL Server in per CPU mode, then you can have complete read access to your data without having any license impact from an SAP perspective. All right, so you don't have to buy any additional licenses. If you're trying to do the same thing with SAP Business One version for HANA, it's a very different scenario. If you want to connect using Microsoft Excel and connect into your HANA database and try and read that data into an Excel spreadsheet, then you have to have, at the bare minimum, what SAP call an indirect access user license. And that's part of the license agreement. So that is also going to have a significant or potentially a significant cost impact as you look at the cost of running SAP Business One version for HANA versus SQL Server. So I do encourage you to familiarize yourselves with this topic. It's going to become more and more important as SAP start to look more closely at how licenses are being utilized and how the technology is being utilized. And you'll see more of this coming in as well when we start looking at the next generation of technologies that SAP are now talking about with things like SAP Leonardo, which is really around taking advantage of the Internet of Things. And you start looking at all of these other devices that can potentially start capturing information and feeding it into your back-end system. All right, so you do need to have an understanding of that. It's not something that necessarily a lot of people understand because SAP licensing can be a little bit complex. But as I point out in my blog post, I did a lot of research and I made sure I spent a lot of time reading through all the license agreements and end user license agreements and so on and so forth to make sure that I was absolutely crystal clear on what that licensing impact was. Having said all of that, if I had to wrap up on a point, I would go back to my original point, which is that I made the decision to run on top of on SAP Business One version for SAP HANA. Why? Because the combination of technology, the combination of speed and analytics made sense for me, and the number of licenses that I needed to purchase was affordable. You'll need to go back and balance up all of those different areas. And of course, one of our if you like, responsibilities, or one of the things that we want to help you with here at ASUG is providing you with as much information as we can to help you make these decisions about how you utilize your SAP technology. So if you've got questions that come up as a result of your investigations into which database platform you want to use, if you're contemplating the change, then get onto the Q&A forum, put in your questions, and I will do my best to answer those for you. So with that, Kimberly, if you're still there, I might pass back to you to finish off for us.
Sure, Richard. Thank you very much. As Richard has stated, please feel free, if you have any last comments or questions, to go ahead and enter those in. We will be posting any slides not from this discussion, but any slides that we do, any presentations that we do for the Business One community can be found on ASUG's discussion page under the SAP Business One space. So we have some past presentations there. Richard has mentioned his blog a couple of times, so please make sure you visit our space, our asug.com SAP Business One space, and find Richard's blog there. You can find previous webcasts there, slides, presentations, all of that information is there for you. So please make sure you visit the site. And Richard, are you, for any questions that people may have for you, maybe down the line, maybe they don't have any right now, where is the best place to find you? Should we email or tweet you?
Yep. The best place to do that, Kimberly, is actually on the SAP Business One community. If you haven't visited for a while, you will see that there's been a lot of changes there, a lot more fresh content. And there on the community, there is a Q&A section. Go in there, pardon me, post your questions, and I will do my best to answer them. And of course, because they are posted publicly, if there are other people in the community who have the answers to those questions or have feedback or additional information, they can post that in there as well. So it's a great resource for you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Richard. And thank you, everyone, for the wonderful questions that you've submitted thus far. We will be hosting more sessions in the future. We make sure to try and have at least one session per month for you. So make sure to be on the lookout. You can definitely be active on the SAP Business One community space on ASUG's discussion page, and you can find Richard there. And obviously, if you have questions or comments, please make sure to be active and participate in the discussions there. Well, thank you very much, Richard, for taking time out of your schedule to present for us. I know it's late there in Australia. We appreciate having you, and we will catch you on the next session. Take care, everyone.